Now, something about context management. Turn off MCP servers that you're not using for that particular app, because the instructions for how to use the MCP server are sent with the context every time you send a message. And it's going to increase your context usage rapidly if you have too many servers online. Turn those off if you're not using them. That's why you saw most of mine are off at any given time. And I just turn on the ones I want right through the manage plugins. So we have those 3 enabled now. And let's go back to using them. The app we're working on is this simple CRM. Last week, we added an invoice function. Well, we started adding an invoice function and then ran out of time on the call, but the add completed, the task was completed after the call ended. This is what it looks like right now. We have 2 users in the account, in this CRM account, and the invoice creator generates an invoice number. We can set a due date. We can set a tax rate. I think the tax rate near me is 7.5%. We can put in terms, and we can put in payment information. If anybody attended last week's call, this was done in a way that it's just going to give a public link so we can send the invoice to people, and then they just pay us by whatever method we put down here. So we could send them our PayPal information or whatever it may be. We did not integrate a payment gateway yet. We'll do that in a future task. So create and add items. And now we have our invoice here, and we can add an item. Let's see here. We can add a toolbox, and it is a very costly little toolbox. There we go. We have that here. We can then send this link to the customer, and it has our invoice information here. But there are a couple bugs that I found in this invoice. So we're going to use the MCP servers to diagnose them. The first thing is, once these are set, when you create the invoice, they aren't changeable. I save this, and when I go to that public link, it's not adding that in. So these fields are not being edited. They are created and they're not being edited, which would be a necessary thing. And then I think I did not fix this bug either, but let me see. I might have fixed this, which would be the status of this invoice. Yeah, the status also doesn't change. So we have a couple bugs to fix there. And we're going to go through the process of debugging those. And I'm going to show you the MCP server usage, as well as how to keep fixes from going off the rails with the new behavior of Claude 4, and Gemini 2.5 is doing this as well, which is overfitting fixes. You give it an instruction to fix something. You say, hey, I changed what was the one that I saw, or an example that's similar? It would be like I say, hey, I changed the payment terms from test to test 1, and it didn't update to test 1 on the front end. And I give it that instruction. I've seen it recently go in and do something like set all values for that to test 1. So it displays what the user wants to see, rather than properly fixing the fact that the save is not working or the pull of new information is not working. So it's overfitting fixes really annoyingly in the past couple weeks. So we're going to try to avoid that here. But let's take a look. We have our system up. We are going to first use file system here. So we have file system enabled right there. We're going to say, do not make changes. Yes, I can use chat mode, and it does seem to make the AI behave poorly. So I leave that in write mode and just tell it to not make changes. Please use the file system MCP to look over this application and use sequential thinking to understand how it makes and updates invoices. Do not make changes. There we go. We'll send that through here. So here it pulled up the file system MCP. You see it accessed the tool, And it was able to list all of the entire file system that we have here for this application. What's really cool about this is it gives any AI the ability to load all of your file system into context. And depending on the model that you're using, a lot of the models have trouble doing that. So this empowers them with that ability no matter what model you're using. And then it pulls up a particular file that it determined was important, which was the model's PI. So it knows how the app is working. And it has pulled up the routes. So it's basically getting an understanding of how this application is built. And it's understanding the UI flow here with our editor. This application is Python with an HTML front end. So it's very, very straightforward little app, not super complex. And then we have our invoice form that it found. Now it jumped into sequential thinking. And what sequential thinking does, actually, we'll go over here. This is pretty interesting. You can see the tool instructions here. And basically, it's telling it to think in a certain way. And it provides instructions to the AI to think in this manner. These are all the instructions that it provides. So instead of typing all these instructions every time, it provides a process to do that. So here it's broken it into 8 thoughts. I need to analyze the invoice system and understand it. So it goes through its thoughts here. Continuing on, now it's to thought 7, and it's to thought 8. And it has analyzed the system, and it says that it has the invoice item, and saved invoice item, the ability to create, to edit, and modify due date, tax rate, status terms, payment instructions, which is where we have an issue. Okay. So that's how those 2 MCPs interact with our content. And then we are going to tell it our issue and try to debug that. When I edit an invoice, the terms, status, payment info, and most other details do not actually update. Why is this? Do not make changes. Generally, you could think about this from either insert or change or upsert type of language, but we're going to keep this super simple. And we're going to tell it also use sequential thinking to understand the issue. And this gives I'm not using the thinking model, but it gives it thinking skills, which is really cool. I find the sequential thinking skills to actually be more effective in most cases than using a thinking model here, like switching over to thinking. Most of the time, the sequential thinking is more effective. Side question for everyone. Has anybody been using O3 at all lately for any of their coding stuff? I have noticed that the O3 is very sassy lately. It will call you out. It'll argue with you. And it's kind of rude, which I get a kick out of. So if you have a tool like this that lets you use O3, give it a shot and just see how it behaves for you. I'd be interested to hear. But I was talking with somebody else this week and they were seeing the same thing, that it's become argumentative. It's very interesting. It does not do the, yes, you are so right. You should continue on with what you're doing. While this is thinking, I wanted to pull up, last week we did a fun little project and it didn't quite finish on Replit. Pull that up, but it finished after the call. So let me see here. Where is it? Here it is. Tony, this might have been your idea. Was the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy quote generator? And it got running shortly after the call. It took it a minute. We saw the one on Lovable came up just fine. I kind of like this one a little bit better, the way this came together. It's not a ton different, but it doesn't just automatically play. You can press play once it goes. Let me make sure that think my audio is shared. Let's give it a shot here. Generate a quote. Did that come through for everybody? No? Had that issue earlier today with Zoom that it wasn't sharing my computer audio. Well, I'll tell you what. It is deployed right here. I'm going to put it in the chat. Oh. And you can see it right there. Play with it yourselves. Fun little app. Let's hop back over here and see where we got. Here we go. When the user submits the invoice details, it's returning false and update logic never executes. I don't love that it said most likely. That seems like an assumption a little bit to me. So let's see what else we have. Yeah, most likely cause. Okay, so instead of having it act on this information, we are going to take it a step further and add logging to see what is happening. So we're not going to guess, right? We're just going to add a log and see what happens. So I need you to create a persistent log file that logs what happens when we try to edit an invoice. Include that log file in git ignore. Do not change anything else. All right. So we don't want our logs going up to git. So we're going to have that created. Now this is interesting. If you have read file enabled, it will often use read file without you asking it to, just to get a better context. It's actually really effective in that way. Sometimes it'll even use read file to create content. I find it to be a little less helpful in that regard. And you can go down here and turn off write file if you want to, if it's using it too much to write file. Right here, it's editing with the Windsurf editor, which is the way I want it to. So I'm not going to mess with it. So it's going to update this. And we will have a logger pretty quick. Let's go ahead and turn off the application, Control C. And this app runs on Python. So instead of npm run dev, it starts up the Python file. Or since I have a Mac, I use Python 3. Let's take a look at what our logger is doing. Okay, so we've created the logger here so we can see what is going on with our invoice editing. And it's going to write to a debug log here when we go to edit an invoice. So let's take a look at what happens here. If we go over to edit invoice, let's just start from the dashboard again. Go to invoices and we will edit this one. And we will just put a -1 at the end, save the invoice, see if it dropped anything in our console, which it did not. And then pop back over here. There we go. Got some errors. So we will then go back and say, do not make changes. Review the log file and see what the issues are. Okay. Let's take a peek ourselves. Form validation failed. It's not sending the client information field correctly, it appears. Yeah. So it needs to send the client field with the information. Thanks for watching. If you want to see more videos like this, please like and follow. And if you need help building or finishing your app, click the link in my bio to book a one-on-one Zoom call to take a look at your project.